I'm not here to review anybody. Let's talk about Superman.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back, the Eye of the Storm podcast. Today, we're here to discuss Superman. But before we get into that, of course, we're here to bring you the latest and greatest things that we've watched in the past week. So, Daniel, do you want to let the people know what the best thing is you watched in the past week?
So I tried a bunch of things and most of them were not amazing, but I did catch the first episode of The Institute, which is an adaptation of a Stephen King novel. I have a really hard time liking current stuff, just for whatever reason. Kind of the tone and feel of most things that are made at the moment is just not my thing. I just don't enjoy it in most cases. And also Stephen King is kind of a mixed bag for me. There's a few things I like from him, but most things of his is just not my thing. Just his stock characters and like his themes and tone, generally not my kind of horror. But The Institute is actually quite good. So the story is essentially that there is this 15, 16-year-old genius who is about to head off to MIT because he's this math prodigy. One night he gets abducted from his bed and wakes up at the Institute. He is told that he is one of very few people who have telekinetic powers and that he is there to learn how to use these powers and then do something that is essential for the survival of the world. And basically, this institute kidnaps children who have these abilities and runs them through this program. And then when they're done with the program, their mind is wiped and they are returned to their families and they can live out the rest of their lives. But they have to fulfill this term of service, essentially. The first episode is free to stream. The rest is behind a paywall. And you need an MGM Plus subscription to see it. So I've just seen the first episode so far, but I'm definitely going to watch it in August when it's all out. And it, like the first episode, was just a good time. It's well acted, well written, avoids a whole bunch of easy cliches. It's just a good watch, and I just had a good time and made me want to see more and made me want to learn what the mystery of the Institute is. So that was a pleasant surprise, and that's my recommendation for the week, even though I don't know how it ends. Like, normally I don't like to recommend things if I haven't seen the ending, because the ending is like often where it falls flat. So this might very well be the case, but like the first episode was just so convincing that I think it's a safe recommendation.
Definitely sounds like one to check out. On my end, I have also an opening 2 episodes of a TV series that I've started watching recently to recommend. And I don't think it's probably as strong as the one that you mentioned, the Institution, but it's called Revival. And essentially the premise behind it is, for some reason, and we haven't figured out the mystery yet, everyone that died in the past X amount of days, I can't remember how many days it is, has come back to life and are completely normal, as in like fully functioning, completely normal. And it's only in this small town. So for that reason, they're quarantined from the outside world. No one can come in, no one can come out. And they essentially are trying to figure out what happened. And within that, you've got a few characters in there. So you've got, a few police officer characters who are like the main ones we follow. You have a whole mystery of someone that died but didn't know that they died. So again, like a whole gimmick of this as well is that they have healing factors now, actually. So if they are stabbed or whatever, then they heal. So there's a situation where one of the characters finds out that they actually died, but they didn't know they died. But they find out through, obviously being injured and healing. And it's got the whole theme of how you like treat others in a situation. It's got some really interesting concepts around what you would do in that situation and like how do you handle that situation, how do you sort of manage public perception, how do you manage public fear and things like that as well. So the tone of it isn't as serious as what I'm describing. The tone of it is quite, a little bit goofy. I'd say it's not quite your Brooklyn Nine-Nine. It's not super serious, but it's not super jokey. It's somewhere in the middle. And I'm only 2 episodes in, and it's probably not the greatest thing in the world, and it's probably not going to explore the whole theme of people coming back to life in as much depth as a more serious show would. But the premise and the idea of it has me interested and has me wanting to watch more.
All right, sounds good. Moving on to the main attraction, Superman. So just to give a quick synopsis, So, Superman is a superhero movie directed by James Gunn. It's the start of a new continuity. The story is essentially that Superman is an established hero in the world, and he has been active for 3 years, and metahumans have been around for much longer than that. And in this world, Superman is kind of growing into his own. He essentially battles Lex Luthor, who challenges Superman in all sorts of different ways, trying to distract him from his real plan, which is to instigate a war between two countries so that he can benefit from one side winning. So Superman has to figure out the scheme and has to try to find a way to figure out what the right thing to do is and then do the right thing. So what did we think of Superman?
This was my one of two of my most anticipated movies of the year. So it was this and Fantastic Four. And the reason for that was I had high faith in both of those movies to restore superhero movies back to where they needed to be in terms of the quality, in terms of the storytelling, etc. And actually, a pleasant surprise this year was Thunderbolts. That's like a side mention as to sort of the superhero genre kind of returning to form after a bit of a shaky past couple of years with a lot of a lot of misses, some hits here and there. This was one of my most anticipated movies. Again, love James Gunn, love what he did with Guardians of the Galaxy and those movies. So I had quite high expectations. And on Superman, I kind of viewed him as I did Captain America before I really got into the Captain America movies, where these were, the epitome of the nice guys, the goody two shoes of, they see the positives and everything. They're just, too bright and are a bit too straight for me. Where I like, a little bit more of a rough edge around my heroes, which is why I like Batman's one of my favorite superheroes. So it had the task of making me interested in Superman, interested in his story, similar to what, the Captain America movies did on their side. On that part, I don't think it did it 100% of the way in terms of making me, really love Superman, the character himself, and making him, one of my favorite superheroes. But the movie as a whole was very enjoyable, was really good, really, really well acted. It had a lot of high moments in the movie. It had good emotions in there as well, in certain parts as well. It made a few changes to Superman's character and his origin, and mainly around his parent as well, which I did enjoy actually. I actually quite enjoyed that. I know that was cause for controversy, but I thought that was actually a good move and a good way to actually bring his character to a new dimension, or actually, add a new layer to the complexity of his character. Nicholas Hoult as Lex was fantastic in this. I feel like he was some of the best parts in this movie. I was worried about him going into this movie just because the trailers didn't show him particularly in the best light, but they save all the best things for the movie for Lex. Like, you just can't help but be captivated anytime he's on screen. He just commands so much presence anytime he's speaking or he's addressing anyone. But I thought the tone was right as well, actually, because again, that was another concern that people had, that I had, was, okay, you've done the Guardians, and of course the Guardians quite a silly tone. How are you going to translate that to Superman, or what approach are you going to have to it? And I thought it struck the right balance, and I thought all of the characters were sort of unique enough and brought humor in the right places where it needed to be. And I never thought that it undercut some of the emotional aspects of the movie. And I don't think James Gunn ever does that in his movies anyways. I feel like things are allowed to breathe in certain places. And I feel like it was done well enough here. I think I left the movie kind of wanting a little bit more, just more of everything. More of Superman's relationship with Lois in this and their whole conflict. There's a whole aspect of Superman and his identity in this. And I felt like there was another level they could have gone on that part as well. But I think overall, it did a very solid job of introducing us to the DCU. I like that we just kind of jump straight into it as well. I like the fact that, things were established. We're not, setting up this world. It means that we're allowed to go crazy with what we do in the movie as well. We're allowed to have really bizarre things, really outlandish things in there that you wouldn't get in a more grounded superhero movie, just because the world is established to sort of say that these heroes have been around for ages. And you can even see by the way that people kind of react to it. It's just there's one particular scene, and I think it's kind of in the trailer, where Superman's talking to Lois and he's lacing up his boots, and there's this purple thing in the background, and the Justice Gang are fighting it, and it just seems like just another day in Metropolis, pretty much. So I do like the randomness of it, and I do like the absurdity of just random things and like random beings just kind of showing up in the universe. I think overall, really good introduction. I enjoyed it quite a lot.
Yeah, so I think we are broadly in agreement about this movie. So we can dig into some of the details later on in the conversation. But my high level impression is the reason I think the superhero genre has been struggling for the last couple of years is because they forgot that character and story are really what hold these things together, and the action spectacle is also important. But if you don't make us care about these characters and the journeys that they go on, then there's no point. Then we're not going to care, we're not going to show up in huge numbers, we're not going to get excited and invested. And I think this movie really learned that lesson and really tried to make us care about Superman. Like, it really spends a lot of time Superman just talking about his feelings, about his perception of how things are and work and what they should be like and what they are like and so on. So we really get a sense of this is a young Superman who is established, who has been doing this for a few years, but he's not fully grown into his own yet. He kind of has a decent idea of what he should be doing, but he's not always able to do it or doesn't always know how. And that is something that really drives this movie. And I think there's a really good place to start a Superman, right? We're not going through all the emotions. He's not discovering his Kryptonian identity. He's not saving kittens out of a tree for the first time, and everybody wonders who this strange person is, right? We jump right into the interesting part, which is Superman trying to grow up, essentially, and trying to become his fully realized self. And that is really ultimately what this movie is about, and it does that quite well. Unfortunately, this movie feels a lot like a movie that has been reworked 3 or 4 times and that has been torn apart and edited, because there are a whole bunch of ideas here that are kind of half developed, and there are some really strong scenes in this that are sandwiched in between not so great scenes, and it feels a lot like there's way too much going on. They should have cut half of it, and then the remaining half would have had more time to breathe. I think that is ultimately the part where this movie is not as great as it could have been, but what it actually is quite good. So let's talk about it.
Probably the best place to start is, I don't know, do we want to do negatives or positive first? Because I feel like we always kind of delve into the negatives and we go quite strong on the negatives. So I'll start with the positives. You said that there was an element, there was like half of it that kind of like worked for you. And what part was that, and why did that work for you?
One really interesting change that this movie makes to the mythos is that in almost every version of Superman, Ma and Pa Kent are the ones who made him who he is. They are the ones who instilled him with his mission and his values and his outlook on life. They are the reason he is so good. And that is not the case here. What is the case here is that he has a fragment of a recording from his parents that tell him to be the protector of Earth and to use his power for good. And that he has made that the basis of his ethos and of his mission, of who he thinks Superman is and should be. When he realizes that this is not the whole story, that the Kryptonians are maybe not exactly conquerors, but they are not as nice as he thought they were, he begins to question his entire identity, and he kind of has to figure out what it is he wants to do and why. Because simply following the guidance of his parents is no longer on the table, because they are not who he thought they were. And I thought that really worked.
They kind of twisted the whole Jor-El and, you know, his parents' messaging to him, just because it kind of aligned with how I would probably imagine it to go. Because, you know, you're from Kryptonite, this planet is doomed. You probably care about Kryptonians enough, because again, the whole thing about Jor-El is that he's trying to advise the council against whatever direction they were going in, because it was going to lead to the death of Krypton. So in modern times, in modern day, I would kind of half expect him to be like, oh, you know, try to rebuild Krypton in Earth, and again, they're sending him to a place where he's clearly going to be the most dominant, and he's going to have no real challenges there. So it would make more sense for him to go there and rule, as opposed to be a servant to the people of Earth. So I know people were up in arms about that, but I feel like that's a nice way of bringing him into modern times a little bit. And again, it creates a good inner conflict in him about, he thought his parents and he thought his people were a certain way, but then they're not. And it's like, okay, what do I do from there? Because I've based my whole identity, I've based my whole thinking around the first half of that message. And then now I've got new information. How do I act around that? So I thought it was a great change in the movie.
I'm a little bit on the fence about whether making the Kryptonians villains or at least ambiguous enough to have no real difference, is really the best call, because like it is a major departure, right? The Kryptonians are a very flawed society, but Jor-El at least has always been a benevolent figure and kind of a mentor. And there was always kind of a division of labor between Park Kent and Jor-El, where they kind of taught him different lessons, but they were both mentors and both good influences. I hope they kind of explore this idea a little bit further in the following movies. The movie has to stand on its own, right? But I think this has the potential to go somewhere interesting. I'm just not fully sold on it yet. One thing it really opens up is this whole idea of why even be a hero. Is it your identity to be a hero? What are you deriving your purpose from? What are you deriving your identity and your kind of moral guidance from? This kind of puts Superman into a position in which he has to come to realize that there's nobody guiding him. He has to make these choices for himself. Right? He cannot simply follow the example of anybody. He has to do it himself. If they do this properly, 3 or 4 movies from now, like the Superman can have learned this lesson and can be turned into a very interesting person who said basically, look, when I was looking for guidance, there was nobody there to guide me. And so in 5 years from now, 10 years from now, when other people need guidance, I will be there and I will guide them. I hope in a couple of movies, this is where this character will be, because that is really interesting. And that is actually a good reason for being such a Boy Scout, because he is frustrated with how not noble the world is. Right? Like James Gunn has said, this is a world in which Superman is kind, but the world is not. And as he becomes more powerful and more established and has a form of authority because of all the things he's done, he will be able to influence the world. And Jor-El wants him to be a conqueror, and he's going to make the choice of, no, actually, I'm going to be a role model. I'm going to be, I want to say influencer, and I hate myself for thinking of that word, but you know what I mean?
No, I get what you mean. I get what you mean on that as well. And then it kind of ties to, different situations that he found himself in this movie where, you have the big kaiju and you can see that he's not struggling with it, but he's trying to find a way to defeat it without killing it and, preserving as much life as possible. So you kind of see the montage of him saving the girl and saving the squirrel and stuff like that. And then the Justice Gang come in. And he's essentially saying, no, we shouldn't kill it. But they kind of just like flip him off. Like they don't really take him seriously. And they just kind of like do their own thing. And they eventually do. I think Mr. Zurich plants his spheres inside the kaiju and blows up his heart.
I just want to say one thing about the Justice Gang. First of all, the name is terrible. And the fact that they spend, like they talk about it 3 or 4 times in the movie was just beyond tedious. But I didn't really like them. But I really like the idea that currently Earth has heroes, but they're not noble. Or maybe put another way, Earth has protectors, but it doesn't have heroes. And Superman is the first hero. That is a cool idea. This idea that Green Lantern and Mr. Terrific and Hawkgirl, they do good things, but they're not good people in that sense, right? They're not nice. They don't wake up in the morning and ask, how can I help somebody today? And Superman does. And I think that is an interesting way of making him distinct. Because if every hero is like this, then why is Superman so special? But if he's the only one, and in that kaiju scene, I really like the idea that he knew very clearly, I don't want to have to kill this thing, but I kind of have to because I can't think of a better way. He's visibly frustrated, right? Like he wins every exchange, right? Every physical exchange, but as he's doing it, he's looking for a better way. He can't find it, and it makes him angry and makes him frustrated. And I like this. I like this kind of idea of Superman is the strongest, he's the fastest, but he's not the smartest. And that is really something that, and we'll get to that too, because that shows up in other parts of this movie too. But that is how you make a character like this interesting. Like, I always hated when movies make it too easy for the hero, where it's just about, are they strong enough? And the answer is yes. Like, they will win in the end. Yes, they will beat the big challenge. They will beat the villain. But if you have to make them struggle along the way. That's what heroic fiction is about. Like you put your hero through the ringer, and then when they overcome these hurdles in the end, that's what feels good. And I feel like in the last couple of years, many movies have kind of forgotten this or kind of slipped a little bit when it comes to this. And this movie really drives the point home that Superman doesn't have all the answers. And that is cool. That is exactly the right thing to do.
A few things there. I can't believe you didn't like the Justice Gang. I mean, they're not perfect, but
more like I don't enjoy watching them. Because they're annoying and they annoy me.
You didn't like Mr. Terrific?
He's the coolest one of them. But like as a group, they're not fun. You know what I mean?
Which is fair. Which is fair. I can give you that. But kind of just tying back to what you're saying about showing your hero going through, struggling and not making it easy for them. Again, like the biggest issue that James Gunn had with this was, that the whole idea of Superman being invincible and being better than everyone and being able to beat everyone. I know some people have different opinions about the opening sort of text, but I thought that was like quite poignant as well in terms of like 300 years ago there was metahumans, and then three or whatever, and it says 3 minutes ago Superman lost for the first time, and you see him crash into the snow, and it's like, okay, this is where we're starting off the movie, and we're starting him
Yeah.
off at a point where he's not at his lowest, because I don't think he was like, mentally sort of at his lowest at that point, but this is the first challenge that he's actually faced, and like, okay, now he has something to overcome throughout the movie. And I thought it was great that he wasn't shown to be all powerful. He wasn't shown to be sort of super dominant over everyone. And for people that kind of go the other way and say that he was shown to be too weak, he actually wasn't shown to be too weak, because in many of the fights he actually bests most people in there, and the only people he struggles against is the clone of himself, which, going by like the movie logic and being in the movie, is like of equal strength, and with the addition of Lex Luthor having studied Superman's fighting patterns. I remember the other time
I was going to say, he's not simply fighting somebody who is his equal. He's fighting somebody who is his equal, and he's being piloted by the smartest man on the planet who wants to kill him. And that is why it's a difficult fight.
And then in most other instances, he's actually shown to be strong, and he's actually shown to be why he's the strongest human in the world, and why he hadn't sort of lost a fight. So I did quite like that. I like that he was like bloodied and bruised, and it just made it a little bit more interesting, because like you said, no one wants to watch a movie where the superhero is just rolling through everyone and it's just like having an easy time of everything, because at that point it's not interesting. We need to see them overcome something. We need to see them, be challenged. And it's like the sports movies. It's like, you want to see the fighter. You want to see Rocky get knocked down, and then you're rooting for him to get back up and to win the fight, essentially. So, yeah, I appreciate that they took that approach in this movie.
And the movie keeps finding ways to challenge Superman in a way that doesn't involve a powerful, like a strong enemy. Right? Like, we're gonna get to Lex in a minute, because Lex is wonderful in this. He's definitely top two. I think the one in the animated series might still be a little bit better, but this is like up there. I dislike most movie portrayals of Lex Luthor, and one of the problems with the Superman movies is that they keep giving us bad versions of Lex Luthor as the only villain, and they keep doing it again and again, and it never quite works. And here it worked, and we get to that in a minute. But another way in which Superman is challenged is his interview with Lois, which he loses. Any opinions on that?
Oh, that was great. That was fantastic. And the fact that it was like the first time that he was like properly challenged on his views, because again, it's established that he was doing his own interviews, and he's actually being
He's a terrible reporter. Like, that's part of it, right? Like, the only reason he has a job is because he keeps feeding himself scoops about Superman. He's not playing fair. If he was playing fair, he would not have the job.
true, because it's actually again, we don't spend too much time with Clark Kent, and we don't spend too much time with him in his role, so we don't know how great he is. But again, it's easy to assume that because he's getting the scoops, it's easy to kind of just like have him on board and have him there. But
They outright say his prose is terrible. Why am I mixing up Superman movies? That was in this movie, right?
no, that was in this movie. Yeah,
Where Perry says like can you just write better?
yeah, that was in this movie. Yeah, okay, yeah. No, yeah, it is established that he isn't a great reporter, or he isn't a great writer at all in this. Back to that scene, I thought that scene that had me on the edge of my seat. I was just like loving the back and forth. I was loving the interaction between them. I was loving the fact that because it was with Lois, he kept like slipping up and getting comfortable and saying stuff that he shouldn't be saying on the record, and they're having to like correct him, be like, you shouldn't be saying that. And again, that was like an area where like the humor was working, but you're also in a serious moment. You're in an intense moment. And like you said, it's like, another situation where he's being challenged, and his whole thinking is, I'm doing the right thing. I'm like, I'm being noble. Why is that such a bad thing? Again, it's like him being the perfect being, but it's like, yes, you're the perfect being, but in this world and within the rules of this society, this is why it's being perceived in this way, and this is why this is wrong, and this is why, you shouldn't have done whatever you've done. So
it's not just that world. Like, in general, he really struggles with the idea of public opinion and with the idea that some problems can't be punched. Because, like, we'll get to the Boravia and Jaipur conflict in a minute, which I think is one of the weaker parts of the movie. But the fact that he cannot it's not as developed as I would like it to be, but this idea that you cannot simply stop a war by showing up and threatening the bad guy. Lois calls it torture at one point, where he takes the president of Boravia and kind of drags him into the desert for Stern talking to, and it does not solve the problem. He can stop a tank, he can stop, a jet, he can threaten the president, but he cannot stop an army. And the minute he leaves, the army comes back, right? So this idea that this is like he's picking a fight he cannot win, because he's picking the wrong kind of fight. He's not quite mature enough yet to realize this. And so he keeps just saying, but it was the right thing to do. What do you want me to do? Not do the right thing? Well, you picked a fight that you don't have the tools to solve. And so it's a little bit more complicated than what you think it is. And you have to look at public opinion and how other people view it, like view your actions. If you're not careful, you can make an enemy of everybody else. And what are you going to do? Fight the entire world? This whole idea of having to manage your statements and your image and your public perception is something that Lois is really good at because it's her job. But he is not good at it because he's not used to being questioned like this. He's used to being celebrated just for showing up because he always does the right thing. But what if he can't? What if he and what if he doesn't? His lack of patience and his lack of, or his frustration with that fact really comes through in this interview, and he simply cannot talk his way out of that problem. And because he can't, he gets frustrated.
And I also liked just like how they left that scene off where she is like, I don't know whether I can do this. And he's like, oh, what do you mean by that? And then they leave it there where he like just walks out and they don't kind of like wrap it up neatly. And that creates a nice little conflict between the two of them, even though it doesn't get as developed as it should for the rest of the movie. And I don't feel like we sit in the conflict enough for the movie to then have that payoff that we have at the end where they're embracing and whatever. But I thought that was like a really solid foundation to create some type of friction within the relationship. Something that, again, we haven't seen too much in the movies because, again, it's like, Superman and Lois, they're meant to be like the perfect couple and, they're just like so madly in love with each other. So, again, it was like a different take to what we normally see of it. And I just kind of wish we explored it a little bit more.
Superman media, every once in a while, finds a way to challenge Superman in a way that doesn't just take his powers away. And whenever they do, it's really good. There's a Superman series on the CW where in one of the early episodes, he's on his phone with his mother and she has a heart attack as he is talking to her. That Superman is played as afraid because he realizes he cannot do anything. Even though he flies there at supersonic speeds to save her, to bring her to the hospital, it's still not enough because none of his powers are good enough to save her in that moment. And showing a Superman powerless and afraid and without making him a chump is difficult. And they did it in this interview scene where first he loses the argument and shows how inadequate his ethics are because they cannot handle a situation like this. And then he loses Lois in the same scene, at least for a while. And that is really cool. I think that deserves credit because it's not easy to do. Another thing that I think this movie is really good at is Lex. Like I said earlier, we've gotten lots of versions of Lex. He's the go-to villain in Superman movies for some reason. Still don't think that's a good choice in general. Not all Superman movies need to be about Lex, but they all are. None of them have been really all that great. And one of the things that this really gets right is, number one, the anger of Lex Luthor at Superman. And we understand why he's angry and we understand why he does what he does. And his intellect. He's actually smart in this. He outsmarts Superman several times. So one of them is when he abducts Crypto, right? Superman crashes his office and Miss Teschmacher is live streaming it, right? So thousands of people are watching as Superman threatens an unarmed man and he cannot touch Lex. And he walked right into Lex's trap and he has no way of getting out. He can turn Lex Luthor into paste on camera, but then he loses. And he can walk away, and then he also loses. This is not the first time I've seen Lex Luthor do this to Superman. There's some episodes of the animated series where he does the same thing. But doing this is the exact right thing. This is how Lex wins.
It's funny because we had the conversation about Superman 1978 and everything that was wrong with the Lex in that particular movie. And again, I'm not super familiar with Lex. And we got the Jesse Eisenberg one in Batman vs Superman, which wasn't a great depiction of Lex at all. You kind of described everything that Lex should be. So I had that in my mind as I was watching the movie. And everything that you were saying about like the obsession and the hatred and him having some type of like god complex and like hating Superman for being that, essentially was just like coming through in everything that was going on in this movie. Essentially, the Lex in this movie had everything that you had described that Lex should be, and I was just loving the performance of it. And of course, you were kind of mentioning about his intellect, but I just loved how ruthless and how savage he was. Like even in the small scene where he's like ranting and he drops the cup of pencils and it smashes, and he's like telling people to pick it up. And as he's like ranting at someone else, he just like drops another cup for them to pick up again afterwards. And it's just like moments like that where I'm just like loving how evil he is and how
So petty.
he literally.
It's wonderful.
No, it's great. And actually, one moment that I didn't expect to go the way it did was with that person that helped Superman up. And again, it's this desperation to try and get Superman on anything and anyone that he cares about. So you have the scene where they're playing Russian roulette, and on the second time round, the gun actually goes off, and I was like, oh, like you kind of you heard the gasp in the cinema, like, oh, they did that, and they went there with Lex. And again, he's just like so whatever about it. He's like, oh, didn't expect to happen, but don't worry, I'm going to go find someone else who's a reporter that you always do interviews with, Clark Kent. Don't worry, I'm going to go find him, and we'll be right back in this situation again. So I just loved how sort of ruthless, savage he was in this, both the obsession and the intellect. So the obsession over Superman, but then the intellect to study sort of his every move, so that when he creates Ultraman in the movie, he's got someone that's equally sort of as strong as Superman, and then has him piloting it and just using all of his moves against him pretty much, which was, yeah, it was all good. It was all good from Lex.
And then the whole thing about the pocket dimension. So first of all, credit for actually doing something interesting. Like this whole thing about the rift, there was a little bit blue sky laser nonsense. But while they were in the pocket dimension, there was some cool stuff there. Specifically, his interdimensional prison, all the little details of how he ran this. Just the fact that he had imprisoned his ex-girlfriend for rejecting him. So petty, so small-minded. When Metamorpho helps Superman, right, get his powers back and escape, everybody turns on them because they're so afraid of Lex about what he will do if he catches them not being obedient. And they're totally afraid of him, and they're completely conditioned to just do whatever Lex wants because all the self-worth has been beaten out of them, and because they've been a prisoner of Lex Luthor for so long. It's wonderful. The way he blackmails Metamorpho into helping him. This whole idea of, okay, like it's a little bit contrived to say, okay, they know about kryptonite, but all the kryptonite is gone, and so we have to make new ones. And how to make new ones? Well, Metamorpho can do it, right? I've never liked kryptonite as a plot device, but this actually worked because it ties into this other idea of Superman's power is that he is selfless, and Lex's flaw is that he is selfish. So Lex always gets other people to do his work for him, right? He manipulates them into doing what he needs them to do without necessarily doing all that much himself. That's true of Metamorpho, that's true of all his henchmen, that's true of Ultraman, right? It's always somebody, like Lex is pulling the strings, but somebody else is pulling the trigger. Like somebody else is actually doing it for him.
Even with the fighting, is that his people around him are actually the ones that are like pulling the command on the thing. He's just calling out what people should do, and then they're doing it on his command as well.
Yeah. And then when Superman kind of catches up with him, he just scrambles for the exit. He will take nobody with him. Being loyal to Lex Luthor has no reward, right? There's no benefit to making sacrifices for Lex Luthor because he will abandon you at the first opportunity, right? And that is kind of exemplified when he scrambles for the portal, leaving all his henchmen behind, and at least one of them outright defects, right? Outright says, "Hey, I can help you shut this down." I think he says it to Mr. Terrific. Lex Luthor does not inspire loyalty, and Superman inspires loyalty. And I think one of the big criticisms of this movie is that Superman is a prisoner for much of it, right? Like we start off with him having lost a fight. So he's bruised, he's bleeding, he's defeated. Later on, he turns himself into the authorities, and he is tricked into this interdimensional prison, and he is depowered for a lot of it. And somebody else has to save him, right? Mr. Terrific and Lois go on this investigation and to spring him out of the prison. I can kind of see the complaint of, hey, I showed up to a Superman movie, but Superman is not doing very much. Why, what's going on? And I think what's going on is that Superman, through his example, has inspired people to do the right thing, which in this case means saving him. If he was somebody like Lex, nobody would show up to help him.
Of course, and even because this kind of even like ties back to the earlier point you made about him eventually becoming a role model in the DCU through his actions and through him being so noble. Yeah, you see that in the final sort of conflict on Barovia, where previously Green Lantern and Hawkgirl were very much against getting involved in the conflict and getting involved in anything that would affect like foreign affairs and things like that. But again, through seeing Superman's dedication to saving people, and then of course seeing that boy that had the Superman flag on the TV screen, that kind of inspired the good in them and inspired them to be better, and kind of stepped away from following the guidelines of what a hero should be and the confinements of all the jurisdictions of where they can operate and where they can't operate and when they should and when they shouldn't operate, to a point where it's like, no, these people need saving, so we're going to go and do it just because it's the right thing. And again, that comes from Superman's influence, that comes from him being so noble and that inspiring people and generating loyalty towards him.
That's another example. Another one where I just wanted to bring up one more example of Lex outsmarting Superman, and that is with social media. Superman, it is said multiple times that Superman is bad at social media. He reads too much of it, he gets angry at it, he doesn't know how to do messaging, and he's being defeated by literal armies of mind-controlled monkeys tweeting. That is an enemy he cannot defeat. Like, he cannot defeat public opinion. And public opinion, like I so often complain about how social commentary does not actually tie into what is going on, but this is something that's going on today, where people's opinions are shaped by algorithms and by propaganda. Like, when we started promoting our podcast on Twitter, I used it for the first time in like 10, 15 years, and I was shocked, like, how unhinged it is. Like, honestly, like, it was a culture shock. Like, I knew it was going on, like, intellectually, but actually clicking into the general feed, like, of a completely new account that does not have any history, like, the amount of nonsense and lies and distortions that are thrown at you is incredible. And people are just inundated in this. How do you do the right thing in a world in which people can't even agree about what's real? That is actually something, like, it's not a huge part of this movie, but it's touched on. This happens quite a bit, right? Where some countries do this, where they kind of deliberately like spread misinformation, just not in order to lie to people necessarily, but to kind of stoke the flames and to kind of escalate already existing conflicts, right? And this is what Lex is doing. He is nudging public opinion against Superman, but he's kind of tapping into things they already believe, right? This idea that it's a bit creepy that an alien is the most powerful being on Earth and that sort of thing. A lot of people have this in the back of their mind, and then Lex's army of social media monkeys kind of taps into that, and it is said that Superman is losing this battle, right? Like, even before we realize that Lex is behind it, it is made clear that this is not something that Superman can cope with. He can only do the right thing, and then the world can judge him for it, and often they will judge him in stupid ways. That is not something he can do anything about.
And like you said, it ties right into, today's social commentary, because, there's the whole thing of bots online and people just like rage baiting and stuff. Genuinely, I actually thought that the perception of the movie of Superman was bad, because I just kept seeing negative reviews after negative reviews of the movie. And I was like, okay, like, was it that bad or whatever? And then you look at Rotten Tomatoes and it was on like 96%, and it had 82, well, it was above 90 for a certain period for critic score as well. And I was like, why is my feed telling me that this is all bad? Like, this is why it's bad, this is why it sucks. But then in reality, the majority of people like the movie, and Twitter is its own hell in its own space. Like, I need to kind of cut ties with that platform anyways or whatever. But it was just like, again, like, that was like another nod to the relevancy of the movie, and like in today's age of just like rage baiting and bots and just like people just like spewing stuff online. But then it also shows how it affects people reading the stuff. And again, it's the stupidest stuff. It's like, he's being called super shit but because he's being called super shit, it's like affecting him because he's like can't take that criticism. And it's even shown in real life as well, to be fair, when they say that like and when they're like talking about him losing the fight, and as Clark Kent, he makes a comment like, "Oh, he didn't get beat that badly," or something along the line. So he clearly already has some type of sort of susceptibility to negative comments from outsiders. It's amplified by the rate that it comes at on social media and the vast majority of the vast amount of it.
Like Superman always is kind of stuck in this kind of idealized 60s, 70s, maybe even 50s kind of thing, where it's a simpler time and it's a time of heroes and monsters and all of that. And the messiness of the modern world is something that Superman has not had to deal with before. And it's interesting that they kind of went there without making a big deal out of it. It's just portrayed as a reality.
Next, we can move on to Lois Lane, because I think we've also agreed that in the vast amounts of sort of Superman medias, and I think you've got more experience than I have, she hasn't always been portrayed in the best of light. And I think my biggest reference point is Man of Steel, where I think she was just null and void, hated her in that, hated her, and Batman vs Superman, really didn't like her in Justice League. I was like, okay, like I've had enough of her. Like it's too much. But what was your opinion of her in this movie? Do you feel like she had enough agency on her side, or do you feel like she could have been given more to do in this movie?
Compared to the other versions, she does a lot, right? Like a lot of screen time is focused on her tracking Superman down, finding somebody to help her, pleading with the Justice Gang, getting through to Mr. Terrific, and then kind of going on this jailbreak. I do wish there was an actual investigation here, like more of an investigation. She just finds him because Mr. Terrific has him bugged, and that's kind of it. There's not much, like there's a little bit, like she talks a little bit about, there's this whole thing about how Lex was not just selling arms to Boravia. He was actually selling them at like a 95% discount, meaning he had some other agenda, and like they uncover that, and that's all fine, but it's just exposition. I wish there was an actual investigation going on in her plot, because she's supposed to be the investigative reporter, and they don't let her do much investigating. I do like the idea that in the end, the journalists are doing a part of the solution. This whole idea where the Daily Planet staff comes together and just whips up this news article. Lois just starts dictating, and Jimmy starts typing, and Perry proofreads it, and they all contribute a little bit, and then it has an actual impact on the world. That's kind of cool. Like it's kind of this old school idea in the superhero genre that like the superhero genre kind of romanticizes certain professions, and journalists are one of them, right? Like there's just all these journalist characters in these various superhero IPs, and it's kind of not, it's never quite really caught up to the modern world like in the last 20 years, because of the state journalism is in, and how the rules have just changed, and just working at a newspaper is kind of not contemporary anymore. But the fact that the journalist did some journalizing in this was something I liked. How good Lois is really depends on how good the scene is, because like I said earlier, there's a couple of scenes that are really good, like the interview or like all the relationship stuff, and her pep talk with Superman while the Justice Gang is fighting the dimensional imp in the background. She's also quite good in that. And then in the less good scenes, she's not quite as good. But I think this is probably one of the best versions of Lois that have existed. And I hope they give her some actual reporting to do in the next movie.
They actually did show her intuitiveness as well. So when Jimmy Olsen gets all the pictures from Miss Tesha, he thinks it's just a bunch of images because she's crazy obsessed with him and she's just sent him a bunch of selfies. But she had the intuitiveness to be like, no, like actually look in the background and pay attention to what's going on in the background, because she's actually sent us pretty much a lot of what we need. And actually, I actually really liked how they used the character. And it was actually really good that I watched the Superman 1978 before watching this, because if I hadn't, I would have been like, why the hell does Lex have her around? But having watched that and having understood a little bit more, she seems to be like a prominent Superman character, it seems, or that's around Lex, or like one of his girlfriends or something like that. I don't know how prominent she is, but the fact that she's come up again after, watching the other movie helped make sense of it. I liked her intuitiveness around being able to actually spot the patterns in the background and spot what was actually going on. And I actually really liked how they used her as well, because at first she came off a bit jarring because she was so different to everyone that was in the movie. And she was down to 100 in this, but I like that essentially her shtick became part of the plot point and became part of what came to be to take Lex down. And again, that speaks to, again, people not having that loyalty to Lex because of the way he is and because of the way he sort of treats people. And her whole fear was ending up like his other girlfriends, making that one mistake that means she ends up in the prison in sort of the Pocket Universe, essentially. So I like that aspect of her, but kind of like tying it back to Lois. I agree with what you're saying. She did have some like really good scenes. She had some like really, really high moments in this. And again, they didn't kind of make her stupid as well in terms of kicking ass or, learning how to do kung fu out of nowhere, because it's not her character. And a different movie or TV show would definitely have that, where she just becomes badass and starts fighting people because she did some karate lesson when she was like 15 or something like that. So I like the fact that she's good at what she does, and she also doesn't need to get involved in the action and isn't out here cracking skulls, because that's not her strength. Her strength is her intellect, her journalism, her intuitiveness, her curiosity around different topics and stuff like that. So yeah, definitely appreciated her and definitely want to see more of her in the next movie.
We're getting a little bit on in time, so maybe let's go to some of the weaker points, because I think they are some.
Yeah.
Like, I think we've established that we really like this movie, and I think like the highs are really high. One thing I really did not care for in this, or that I think is a real problem, is that the key part of the story is Superman kind of having to choose between identities and having to come to the terms that what he thought his identity was is not real, because his parents are not who he thought they were, like his biological parents. So he has to kind of come up with a new idea of who he is and why he does what he does. So when I saw this movie, I saw it relatively early. I sent you a message in our group chat about how the ending made me tear up, and it's completely undeserved, and it still worked, something like that. And yeah, honestly, that's what happened. Like, when he, for the second time, is kind of goes on this sun bed kind of thing, right? And the robots kind of charge him up, and they ask him, "Would you like to see recordings of your parents?" And this time, it's not the Kryptonians. This time, it's the Kens. Honestly, like, I had something in my eye when that happened, because it's so, like, this is one of the things that James Gunn is good. He can push the emotion, right? Like, James Gunn made me care for a CGI rabbit once. Like Guardians of the Galaxy 3, this whole scene where we have the sob story about Rocket Raccoon's tragic past, it should not work. Like, a CGI character like this should not make us care, but it does. And that is because James Gunn knows what he's doing when it comes to this specific type of storytelling. And that is a moment where it worked. And it's completely unearned. I don't think there's enough in the movie to really drive home this idea of this is what the Kryptonian side of his identity is, and this is what the human side is. And he thought he should be focused all on this side, but he's actually, like, this was the right side, the good side all along. This moment where he has to make that choice is missing. Like, it's not really there, I don't think.
I don't think it's really there, but to kind of play the other side of it, it's almost like nature versus nurture, essentially. And he believed, like, his Kryptonian parents were the nature side of things, and he believed that this was essentially what he was born to do. This was his people, and this was the idea, essentially. And then he came to find out that that wasn't it, and that completely like shattered his whole perception of who he was, essentially. And then you have the nurture side of things, which was Martin Park Kent, and this is more how he was guided to be who he was. And like, these are the experiences, and they show like loads of different aspects of like him as a child, him on like, I think it was like birthdays and stuff like that, and all of those experiences of love and like being like cared for, especially not being their child, especially being an adopted child. I don't know people specifically, but you like know stories of people that go through the adoption or fostering programs, and they come out worse for it. So he ended up in like a lucky situation where he had a really loving family that really took care of him, and he's using that as more motivation and more inspiration as to who he should be like. So he's more accepting the nurture side of things as opposed to the nature, if that makes sense.
I don't think it's just nature and nurture, because what he identifies with is the guidance Jor-El gives him, right, in the recording. Like, be a good person. Like, that is kind of the motivation. And then he kind of has to realize that his role model is tainted. His personal hero is not a hero. That is kind of what's going on here. which kind of ties into this immigrant idea, right? So James Gunn is by nature a troll, right? Like if you paid attention to why he got fired from Marvel and like his early days, that guy is a troll. In the week leading up to the release, he was trolling specifically like Fox News and like other outfits like this by really playing up that Superman is an immigrant and this is an immigrant story. It's not really. It's like the story of a second, third generation immigrant about somebody who has this cultural influence, but it's theoretical and abstract. It's not a lived reality, but it's part of his identity and self-image. And then he actually goes out to meet or experience or learn more about this culture, right, that he has idolized. He realizes not that great and that he needs to be his own person. That is actually what it's about. It's not really about the immigrant experience. It's about somebody who's kind of got a multicultural background and realizes they were not right about what they believed about their ancestors.
Yeah, no, I can see that.
And my original point was, by playing up the immigrant angle, he got days of free advertising from places like Fox News, which was really funny, but it's not really in the movie.
No, not at all. I did see that, and I did see the uproar around that, and I was like, okay, that probably fed into why I had so much like negative stuff on my flipping feed. Like at first, it was all around that, and then you had like, then this is like a topic we won't touch on, but it was like the whole comparison to like Man of Steel and stuff like that. I'm like, Jesus Christ, please, can people grow up and move on from that?
All I say about that is, number one, I didn't like the DCU, and also they had a decade. It's time for something else.
No, exactly.
This whole being conflicted between his identities and the choice he has to make and how to react and how people react to the revelation is very rushed. It's very incomplete. And the final scene, even though it feels right, it's kind of not really earned. So that is something, and that is kind of one of the things where if you had just cut out a couple of supporting characters and a couple of scenes here and there, you could have done more about him struggling with this. Like we talked about Equilibrium just a few weeks ago, where like a third of the movie is the protagonist struggling with his realization that the world he believed existed didn't exist, or it's no longer for him. And the movie is kind of held up by the protagonist actually wrestling with this and going back and forth and kind of debating with himself. And we see him go through the process. He does not simply change. And many modern movies skip this, and this movie is one of them. It also skips like not all of it, but large chunks of this process where he struggles with what his identity is.
I'm surprised. I was gonna say, I'm surprised you talk about cutting out characters, and I know you mentioned that you didn't really like the Justice Gang. I don't think they had too much in this movie or too much screen time in this movie, and I actually enjoyed the whole dynamic between all of them. I enjoyed the interactions. I enjoyed what they gave to the movie. I do agree that if it was cut out, we probably would have had a little bit more of him wrestling with the whole crisis of seeing his parents' full message. My solution to that is adding on another 15 or 20 minutes. And I know we're complete opposite in this. Like, I will take a 3-hour Superman movie if they gave it. Like, I was super happy when we got the 3-hour Batman movie, but I know that you're not as open to longer movies. Of course, if it makes sense for it to be longer, then I'm sure you'd be happy with it. But I always want more.
Yeah, if this movie is 2 hours 25, 2 hours 30, and in exchange we get the important parts better developed, and totally for it. My thing is just the movie is overstuffed with stuff.
I don't think it's overstuffed with stuff. Like what? Okay, so aside from the Justice Gang, what else would you cut out?
Cat Grant does nothing in this. Why is she there? I think
who's Cat Grant?
Cat Grant is one of those reporters that stands in the background.
Oh, okay. She doesn't take up too much.
That's true. That's true. She doesn't take up too much time. But like a bunch of stuff could have been trimmed. And you could have freed up 15, 20 minutes and have those 15, 20 minutes focused on the really important stuff. I don't have strong opinions about what specific scenes to cut. It's more like I felt like there was too much going on. I think the stuff in the dimensional prison could be shortened quite a bit. The whole thing about the antimatter river, I don't know that had to be there, for example.
I agree, yeah.
That was the one part in the movie where I was bored. And we could have freed up 10 minutes by simply streamlining the prison break a little bit and skip the entire thing about the antimatter river. One other thing, Green Lantern breaks this movie. Let me explain to you why. So, do you know who Green Lantern is?
Ish, yes, yeah, and he's meant to be the Hal Jordan version of Green Lantern, because I know that there's various amounts of them, and there's a whole Green Lantern Corps and stuff like that. Yeah.
So he's a space cop. Is the important part, and he works for aliens. First of all, the people are freaked out by an alien taking control of Earth, right? What is Green Lantern if not somebody taking control of Earth on behalf of aliens? Like, he's not literally taking control, but he basically swoops in from the outside and says, I am in charge of the sector of space and I enforce the law in the sector of space and Earth is in it. And so I'm the authority on that level. That is who Green Lantern is. But nobody cares about that.
Isn't he shown to be cooperating to a certain extent anyways with how affairs work in on this planet, because he's not overstepping,
Yeah.
he's not doing what he wants. He still kind of is working within restrictions and guidelines.
Yes, but he is still working with aliens and he is still an authority figure. So people know about aliens. Aliens are a fact of life. Otherwise, Green Lantern doesn't make any sense. And so, why is that okay? But a message existing where somebody tells Superman to be a conqueror, but he's never shown any inclination that he's doing this. Why does that freak everybody out? There's a major plot hole in this that should have been addressed. I think the way you address it is to have Green Lantern go to Superman and say, I'm watching you. If you step out of line, if you start bossing people around, the Guardian Corps is going to be on top of you. But that is how you create conflict between those two characters.
But they had the one moment when the message first comes out and they're in like the supermarket and he covers the screen and he says like, is this what you're here for, essentially? Like they do have that exchange. And I also, again, where I kind of give the movie credit, because James Gunn is changing stuff about how some of the comic book stuff is adapted into the movies. It's not explicitly said that I mean, obviously you can imply that he's working for sort of the Green Lantern Corps. Well, he is working for the Green Lantern Corps, but I didn't get the feeling that he was in charge, like he was fully in charge and like, you know, the planet had to answer to him, because you had the whole thing with Lex trying to create Planet Watch on his side of things and like having his own sort of organization of metahumans that would defend the planet essentially, and he was discussing it with and again, it's not like Green Lantern was part of any of the meetings with, you know, things like people like Rick Flag Sr. and the other government officials as well. So that's why I kind of give it some slack. And I say, like, it wasn't in the movie, and because it's not in the movie, can't really be a plot hole.
You're right, he does not run Earth, right? But he still has the ring, he's still Green Lantern, he's like, the powers are the same, the characterization is the same. If he's not working for the Green Lantern Corps, I think he mentions
them is
at one point, right?
Yeah, he is, but it, like, to me, it didn't feel like he had that control over the planet. Like he wasn't.
Yeah, he doesn't. But like, so my thing is just, why are people not freaked out by this? Like, shouldn't people have the same concern about Green Lantern that they have about Superman in this? Especially since people are so shocked about this idea that an alien could come to Earth and start bossing people around when Green Lantern is right there. It's not the most pressing thing, but I do think there's something missing here. As people just didn't think that part through, or they should not have put Green Lantern into this. At least they should have, like, you're right that there's this one line where Green Lantern says something about, is this real? Right? Like, is this really what's going on? And Superman says no. This, like, the first half yes, the second half no. That's kind of what it is. But Green Lantern does not go into Space Cop mode, you know, to protect Earth, because that's his job, right? So anyway, that's just one aspect of it. Generally, the world building, I think this is really shoddy. This does not feel like a real world. According to the opening sequence, metahumans have been around for 300 years. But like you mentioned earlier, that people are kind of used to the idea, and they don't really, like, there's no panic, you know, when a kaiju attacks, because people are used to weird stuff happening, and then the heroes show up and they want to, you know, take selfies with it and whatever, right? That's all well and good, but I didn't feel like the world really felt like this had been going on for 300 years. It's too similar to our world for that. I don't know, it just did not feel real, is my problem.
Yeah, and my other thing was like, where were the other? And again, you can't stuff everyone in this movie, but when you have, and this is where they probably should have gone a different direction with the ending of the movie. But where you have this like dimensional hole or like rip that's like ripping through Metropolis, it's like, okay, shouldn't someone else show up at some point? I don't know. Like, if there was like a whole bunch of metahumans, you have like the Justice Gang, you have like things like Planet Watch trying to be created. I'm sure that there was like other people out there that would take notice. This is why anytime that these superhero movies have world-ending threats happening, I'm always a bit like, because you can't have everyone in the movie, so you have to like now explain why people don't show up or why people didn't show up. I don't know what they plan to do with the Flash, but I'm sure the Flash would to kind of see what's going on and be like, oh, let me go check that out or something like that. I don't know.
It's not simply about characters showing up. It's also more like how people talk and behave. Like, I don't know, like the military, the government, it does not feel like a world that has been through some things. I don't expect them to completely rewrite the last 300 years of history. That should not be the same. But it's more like, I did not, like, it just based on feels and vibes. I did not get the feeling that this was a coherent world that we are kind of being thrown into. Rather, we are simply being told that this is established. I don't know, it just didn't feel very thought through to me. And that kind of like one of the reasons why the MCU currently is not really compelling to me is because it does not behave like the events of the last 17 years have actually happened in this world, and people's behavior and expectations and beliefs and tactics and whatever do not line up with the kind of world they live in. And I'm a little bit afraid that this will be hand-waved here too. That once we are 3 or 4 movies in, it will become clear this does not make sense. This is not a coherent world. We're not being presented with a fully realized world in which people behave in a way that is consistent with what we're told this world is like. This is just the first movie, and this could all change. But this was something that was in the back of my mind as the movie was going on.
Do you know where they actually should have shown it, or where they could have shown it a little bit better? Was the evacuation of the city. Once they saw the dimensional tear was coming to the city, I feel like they probably should have, again, if it's a world where there's been metahumans and there's been these attacks, there should be a protocol, or there should be a strategy for how you get people safe, whether it's like, bunkers or an evacuation process. But it just seemed to behave, again, like you say, like as it would in the real world, where people are in their cars, people are crashing, everyone's like trying to get on the boat. And there wasn't a specific plan for, okay, this is what happens when there's an attack on the city.
Every building should have fallout shelters, right? In case of metahuman crisis, go to your designated, metahuman shelter and wait it out until the heroes win. It's like people in Japan treat earthquakes, or people in the Midwest treat hurricanes. It should just be a fact of life, and it just does not happen here. Really, like it looks like this just happened, but it's only Superman who was recent. Everybody else has been around for decades and centuries. What else? There's this idea of metahumans taking over, right? Which I think it's not a flaw exactly, but it's in the column of things that are underdeveloped. We've got the whole conflict between Boravia and Jarapur, which I think was really terrible. Like just the idea is good. Like this idea that there's a war happening and it's being stoked by Lex, and Superman can't stop it because it's not the kind of thing Superman can stop. As an idea, really good. The way it was realized was terrible. Like it was so simplistic, and so it felt so fake that like the geopolitics of this is just the biggest nonsense ever. And maybe this is because this is supposed to happen in Eastern Europe, and we know what a land war in Eastern Europe looks like in 2025 because it's actually happening. Nobody cares, nobody notices, it just happens. Is not realistic, like it's not believable at all. They should have kept it more abstract, or it should have been like Jaipur is like a province, and the central government is taking over, and the world doesn't do anything because it's an internal matter, or like something. Like it would have been possible to construct this idea or this conflict in a way that actually made some kind of sense. And then they are so like the characterization of the two sides is so one-sided. It's literally cartoonish, where one side is like just the evil army, and the other side is just a couple of helpless villagers who don't even have guns. Like somehow Jaipur does not have an army, and there are no borders, and like nobody fights back. They are just helpless villagers. It's just so one-sided that I just simply could not respect it. Like just as a story.
It was being closely tied, or like the discussion around it was being closely tied to obviously what's happening in the Middle East, and that's how people sort of resonated with it and related to it. And of course, that one's a little bit more complex as well than how it was portrayed in sort of this particular movie. But it seemed like the conversation around it was that people could recognize how things were playing out in this movie, especially the whole aspect of there's bad things happening. But even though there's bad things happening, because of political allegiances and because of people being deemed as allies, etc., is you kind of have to look past some of the atrocities, or you have to look past some of the bad things that are happening. And then you have Superman that comes in. It's like, no, forget all of that. Like, what is the right and wrong thing that should be happening, and what is essentially good? Like, what's meant to be the good thing to do in this situation? So again, it was simplified, and I don't think the movie spent too much time focusing. I mean, of course, it's like a major plot point, but we don't spend too much time in the actual sort of conflict zone in the war zone. I actually don't think it was needed to be portrayed, to be fair. And it might not even be like just be related to the Middle East. It's like, these are bad things that can happen in the world, but because of how a country is aligned or positioned with another country will determine what action is taken as opposed to just the right thing being done.
I'm not saying this has to be some deep study of geopolitics, but can you just not construct it in a way that does not immediately trigger like 20 different sirens are going off, like the bullshit alarm is ringing? You know what I mean? Like there would be just much better ways of doing this, including portraying how like civilians are caught in the middle of this, right? Just show like a village that is being decimated by these two armies that are fighting, and you can have your bad guys in this, right? This does not have to be a both sides kind of thing. But if this was like this idea of there is an actual conflict going on here that has been going on for a long time, people have tried to solve it and can't for whatever reason, right? Like construct the history in a way to make it just hard to solve, right? You cannot simply show up with good intentions and it's fine, which is the point of this, right? That it is not enough to simply show up with good intentions and punch some bad guys and then the problem is solved. The whole point of this is that doing that fails. Like you cannot do this. And in order to do this, you would, I think, need to construct it in a way where it is understandable why this conflict will just keep going. I honestly think like that is something where the movie would just be vastly better if a little bit more care, and I'm talking like half an hour of thinking it through would have been enough to construct something that ticked that box. Because it's supposed to be a situation designed by Lex to be unsolvable for Superman. The way this plays out, right? Like when the Justice Gang shows up, you can in fact just punch the bad people, and that does in fact solve the problem. So what was the problem? Like what was the dilemma? What was Lex's plan? You know what I mean? It does not hold up. It's just weak. And you can absolutely talk about like timely issues where, this whole thing about Baravia is a US ally and therefore the US does not intervene and whatever. All of that you can have, and you can still make it a little bit less childish and a little bit less one-sided, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think I think there should have been a better way to resolve that. And I think the problem with it is that it's not like the resolution to that isn't tied to Superman. I mean, the only aspect of it that's tied to Superman is that he's inspired Green Lantern and Hawk Girl to actually go there and sort of support Arabia.
Jaipur. They support Jaipur.
Jaipur. Okay, yeah, I get the two confused because it's a diplomatic issue over there created by Lex and complicated by Lex.
Yeah. So this is solved by diplomats and peacekeepers and treaties. It's not solved by a guy in tights.
Yeah.
That's supposed to be the whole point.
Yeah. Again, I'm trying to think: is the purpose of it just to show and highlight, and then like this is what like the right thing should be to do? Or are we doing a bit more of a complex deep dive on the topic and then on the situation? Like, this is how we need to resolve the conflict, essentially, and like trying to create solutions to it. Whereas I think this is more awareness over how to resolve an issue.
Maybe a middle ground is a scene in which the heroes save some civilians, but they don't solve the problem. And it's clear that the war will continue and more people will die. And this will go on for a while, but these people are saved. That would have been one way to do it.
Yeah, true. But yeah, I guess we should wrap it up. Or do you have one more?
Just want to bring up one more thing. And there's this idea that the metahumans are taking over and governments are losing control, right? So the whole Jaipur Boravia conflict is part of that, right? That in the end, it's solved by the metahumans showing up, right? And there's a scene in which one general says to another, yeah, they make the rules now. Like, we are no longer in charge, right? And then there's also this idea that Jor-El wants Kal-El to rule, right? Like this idea that you are strong and powerful, and the most powerful being on this planet. Therefore, you can rule, and therefore you should rule. That is Jor-El's position, right? So this idea of the supermen taking over is something that is seeded in at least 3 different ways in this movie. And I wonder, and like at the moment, I find it unsatisfying because it's not really talked about that much. It's kind of sprinkled in, and there's a couple of scenes where it's touched on, but it's not really the crux of the story, right? Like, and I think you could have taken this idea and the idea of identity and why you do what you do, married those two things, and that is Superman's arc. In my opinion, if that had been the focus, the movie would have been stronger. But I wonder if that is going to be kind of the overarching idea in the next couple of movies. And that is interesting because, in my view, I think we talked about this in our Winter Soldier conversation about what happens when politics and superheroes kind of intersect and how that doesn't really work. Like, my idea is that superheroes existing or metahumans existing is the end of law, the end of civilization. At that point, we are back to warlords. Like, whoever is strongest gets to make the rules, and that is a disaster. That is not something we should want. And this movie is seeding the idea that this is what is happening. And I wonder if the next couple of movies are expanding on this idea and we're moving towards a status quo in which that it becomes a reality and becomes a real issue. And I really want them to do this, and I really want them to do it smartly, because I want some superhero movies to go there and actually ask the question: is it actually good to have like people like this make the rules?
I definitely felt that when I was watching the movie. I definitely felt like they were heading in that direction again. What would have been interesting is to, I know we kind of jumped into this like 3 years into Superman's journey, but and 300 years into metahumans existing, but how did they still have control over the metahumans? Like, it's not explored too much in this particular movie. It's just like seeded the whole idea of metahumans taking over, but it would be interesting to know how they even had them under control in the first place, to then know how the metahumans are then able to sort of kind of like break away from that, because essentially Superman's actions has emboldened people to be like, okay, like I can kind of do what I want. Like, I'm powerful enough, and like I don't, not that, like I actually don't have to answer to anyone. It's like, Superman's doing it because he feels it's the right thing to do. What happens when a villain decides that I want this because this is what I want for myself, essentially, and again it starts like to mess up the balance of the universe. So I do feel like it's being seeded in the movie. I do feel like we're heading in that direction of some type of like lawlessness, and I wonder whether that's like when we get people like Batman and stuff coming into the movies, because like, that would be like quite interesting.
That could be a cool place to take Batman. You touched on one idea that I think is really interesting, which is, what if somebody is inspired by Superman to do the right thing and Superman doesn't think it's the right thing? What if somebody intervenes for Boravia next time? Well, like kind of like the hammer of Boravia was fake in this, but what if the next one is real? And if that person cites Superman, why they can or and should do this?
Because I was even thinking, like when we were talking about Batman there, I was like thinking about all of the villains being in positions of power, and again, like there would probably be like an element of lawlessness to it, but similar to what we had in like Daredevil, we have like Mayor Fisk, for example, and I'm sure there's been situations in the Batman comics, I don't know too well, where you probably had like a Mayor Penguin, or like someone like that running the city or in like a position of power, and of course like then abusing it. Like it'd be very interesting. And again, I feel like we're heading that way. I feel like what they talk about a lot is this 10-year plan that they have, and David Zaslav came out and talked about this 10-year plan. So I don't think what they had stopped at this movie in terms of the ideas and the through line and what the story is going to be. I feel like this was focused enough on Superman whilst plotting those seeds of lawlessness to come. I feel, anyways, I feel like that's where they're heading. But we'll see.
Yeah. I'm gonna fantasize about this for the next 3 years and then be disappointed in 4 years when it becomes clear what they're doing. I hope that's not what it is, but I do not. I just cannot believe that they would actually do that. I would be so surprised. But some surprises are nice. So let's see what they do. Or should we go to conclusions?
Yeah, it's like it's 10 to midnight. Time to collect. Time to wrap this up.
Yeah.
In conclusion, I think this is a very enjoyable movie. I actually can't wait to watch it again. I'm sure to go this week again to watch it back. It's not the best superhero movie of all time. I don't even know if it cracks my top 10 superhero movies of all time, but it's definitely a very enjoyable superhero movie. It definitely hits all the right tones. It definitely, has a lot of good, interesting characters in here that I'm keen to see again, heading further into the DC universe. It did what it needed to do. It kind of restored the feeling. I would say it restored the feeling, especially for DC anyways. Like I support DC, I support Marvel. I like them both. But for DC, It's restored the feeling. It's, again, for me, and we didn't talk about this too much, it's kind of confirmed James Gunn as one of the best comic book movie directors, I would say. I don't think all of his movies are the best comic book movies, but he's very consistent in what he delivers, from the Guardians of the Galaxy to Suicide Squad to now the Superman movie. I think he's like just very consistent in creating comic book movies. Definitely worth a watch. Definitely go check it out. I would give this, and this is because I like superhero movies, so it's going to get a higher mark by default, but I will give this a 8.5 out of 10.
I went into this with a militant attitude of no expectations. If it's good, it's good. If it's not, then it's not. And I do think it has a whole bunch of very real flaws. And I was kind of down on it when I kind of thought about it, like the day after I saw it. But I think our conversation has brought kind of the good parts back into focus. And I just wish it was a little bit more styled through and was a little bit more efficient and was a little bit more focused. But the highs are really high, the lows are not that low. There's nothing in this that's just outright stupid or broken. The biggest thing is that it's a good version of Superman. Might be the best Superman movie, I think, just as a movie, as a story, like overall, like big picture. A bunch of the other Superman movies had their good parts, but this, I think, is the most holistically good Superman movie, in my opinion. It puts character and story back into focus, character more so than story. The stuff that they get right, they get really right. I have some concerns about the world not making as much sense as it needs to, and the movie just being a little bit overcrowded, a little bit scattered. That keeps it from being truly great. So my overall rating is a yes, but out of 5.
All right, guys, you heard it here first. If you reached this part of the episode, thank you very much for working with us. Of course, we appreciate your support, as always. If you enjoyed our discussion and like what we had to say today, you should probably tell a friend. And if you hated our discussion and thought we were chatting a bunch of nonsense, then there's a box of kryptonite on the way to you tonight. We are the Eye of the Storm podcast. See you later.
Bye bye.